So, Arc bosses, how to do them and what you need to prepare to be able to do them. We're going to get into all of that in today's video, and I'm not going to waste time with the intro, so I'm going to get into it. Now, if we're talking about the island, we're going to need some artifacts and other resources. You can go to the obelisk yourself and look at what those resources are and the artifacts. If you don't want to do that though, then simply look it up on your phone or your laptop. I'm not doing your research for you. You're going to have to look that up yourself, as I don't want you to do a little bit of work for this. So look it up or go to the obelisk and find out yourself. Then once you know what you need for the boss, you're going to need to get those things. That's pretty self-explanatory. Do the caves for the necessary artifacts and get the necessary resources that you're going to need for the boss, of course. But, you know, there's no point in getting all of the resources for the boss and then not being able to do the boss because you do not have the creatures. Perhaps a little bit of research should be done into looking into the boss and finding what the boss's weaknesses are. Now, for the island, I'll give you some giveaways. Now, for bosses like the Broodmother and the Dragon on the island, it is very, very self-explanatory on what creatures I would use. For the Broodmother, the obvious use of creature here is the Megatherium, because it kills all the little Araneos you can see on the screen right now as I show you some Broodmother footage. You can see the Megatherium's absolutely going to town on those little spidey things and just absolutely going at it and doing tons and tons of damage. And the reason why they do this is because they get an enraged buff. Then for the dragon, I'd use Theres as their really high damage herbivores, because the dragon's fire is particularly harsh to those carnivores. Unfairly harsh, I might say, in my opinion. So that's not the best there, so I'd use Theres for the dragon, and obviously Megatheriums for the Broodmother. In terms of the Megapithecus, it doesn't really matter. Spinos or Rexes or Aloes you can get away with pretty easily, or you could even still use Megatheriums or Theres. It doesn't really matter as long as you've got the damage outputs. Now, while breeding is a good way to get some really high level good stuff for doing bosses, if breeding is not your thing, then by all means go out and just do loads of taming and get some levels up on your creatures. You want your creatures to be as well prepared as possible, but another way to shortcut this is go and do some drop hunting and find some good level saddles, as a good level saddle means that your creature has a lot more armor, and then with that armor it takes less damage, of course, and from that you can get a lot more utility out of your creatures. I tend to not breed them unless I'm doing, like, you know, the boss on Gen 1 that's surprisingly difficult, and especially on Alpha it's a pain, but especially for like those Gamma and Beta levels it really isn't all too much of an issue going around and, you know, doing those without breeded creatures. You shouldn't really face an issue there. But if you want the extra level of strength, then by all means go for it. And then some necessary things. Generally, a Daedon is a must-have. You perhaps need one for every fight, especially on Gamma and Beta variants, but when you get to Alpha, have a Daedon and just fill it with as much meat as you possibly can. If you've got raw meat and it's not encumbered by it, just give it that meat, and then have it follow your UT, because your UT is probably where you're going to be riding, especially if you're playing solo and you're doing these bosses. So if you're doing it with other players, then maybe someone else can do the UT, but you should be on the UT, and from that you can buff your own creatures, and then it will give your creatures extra damage and give them more defense against the enemy creatures, and that really improves your odds. And then with the Daedon following your UT, it means where you are, then it's healing the creatures around it, but it's also healing the UT, so then your UT doesn't die when it's near you, and then from that, boom, you have this cycle where you're buffing your creatures, giving your creatures better stuff. You're also getting healed by the Daedon, and also the creatures that are in the fight, because you won't be that far off, will also be getting healed by all of that stuff as well. So it's good once you get that cycle, that circle through, and you can get all these creatures damaging and dealing damage essentially. Then you also want to check for bosses like the Moda. The preparation stages are very, very different. You always want to check the requirements, of course, because, you know, you want to know what the requirements are for the bosses, and it's not always the simple obelisk artifacts and other things. Like, you need to do a certain level of missions on Gen 1, and there's things like that. And for the Moda, obviously you're going to want some underwater creatures, perhaps some Moses, perhaps some Megalodons to do that fight. So you want to vary the creatures for the boss fight and, you know, change it depending on the boss fight. But it doesn't help to look and do some research and do some taming. But you want to make sure that your army is of adequate size, but not too big. If you have more than 20 creatures, generally they won't spawn into the boss fight. And some of them might be a little bit bigger, especially on Extinction. You can sort of have as many as you want for doing, especially the final Titan bosses. Get on Gamma, Beta, or Alpha, you can stack as many there as you want. But generally, it's about 25 people and 20 dinos per boss really is what you're looking at. So don't make your army too big, because then you're not going to be able to get all of those creatures in. You do want them also all to fit on the teleporter. In terms of transportation, because it's always the most annoying bit of doing a boss, is just getting all your dinos there, especially in the olden days before cryopods. But now that we have cryopods, or if you're using the Soul Traps mod, much prefer that's cryopods, so I'm always using it these days. Then boom, make sure you cryopod your dinos, and then you can take them out. But if you're using cryopods rather than soul traps, you've got to be careful with cryo sickness, and then wait for things, and it can still be a little bit of a faff for transporting dinos. So do allow yourself adequate time to transport those dinos, because it will take a while, especially if you're on a server and you've got a limited time frame. It could get pretty tight with transporting those dinos to and from. It won't be as bad putting them back into the cryopods, but getting them out and getting them all there and getting them all on the platform and organizing it all, it can be pretty difficult. So, you know, make sure that you're adequately getting them there and getting them there efficiently, and you don't have to wait for cryo sickness times and things. Soul Traps is a much better way of doing things, and I would definitely advise you to get that mod. If you're on ASA, you've literally got no excuse, because you can download that mod. If you're on ASA console, then I'm sorry for you, you're going to have to keep using those cryopods. But if you're on ASA PC or ASA at all, there is no excuse. Don't use cryopods, because they are a pain. Unless you're on a server where you have to use cryopods, use the Soul Traps mod, because it is just so much better. It's easy cryopods, you don't get the cryo sickness, and they go in and out really easily and quickly, and you can store them very efficiently. There's even a gun where you can shoot your creatures back in and shoot them back out again. It's such a nice mod, and it works so well and so effectively. So really get your transport stuff down, and ultimately it's all about good preparation leads to good results. But also, if you fail, then you've got to critique yourself on why did you fail, because you know sometimes it's really obvious why you failed. None of your creatures were strong enough, that's it. But if it was you died and not all your creatures died, especially in the case of maybe a boss like the one in Gen 1, what can you do to yourself to make sure that you do much better? You know, do you need more healing potions? Do you need, you know, some chowders and things like that to improve your abilities? Do you need stamina regen potions and all this other stuff? Do you want and need all of this stuff to get through and get that stuff done? Because it's not just about buffing your dinos. In some cases, it's about buffing you and making sure you don't die. Especially if you're playing solo, if you die, that's it, and you've got much less health than all your dinos, so it doesn't matter how much health they have if you can't keep yourself alive. So that is one last tip: make sure to keep yourself alive, because it doesn't matter how strong your dinos are if you are not strong enough to survive. You need to be able to tank a little bit of damage. Good armor is obviously essential, and some good weapons for you as well. Always bring a pump action shotgun. It's what I do to any sort of boss, because then you can do some fending off for yourself and, you know, get around things adequately and effectively. Generally, flat gear is where I'll stop, but I'll get some pretty good flat gear. I won't just stop at primitive flat gear, but you can get the tech stuff as well, and riot stuff even. But I tend to skip the riot stuff, really. I never get it unless I can just very easily make it. So flak's where I'd say, especially for something like the island or really any boss, I'm always just in flak for some reason. That's what I do. And also, if you're wondering about the Moda and oxygen stuff, oxygen doesn't apply when you're in the boss fight, so you should be fine, and you're not going to run out of oxygen when you're fighting the Moda. At least that's how I remember it. If I got that wrong, then I'm very sorry. But as far as I'm concerned, the last time I did it, I was wearing flak, and I didn't have to worry about oxygen. I was worried about oxygen, and then I didn't need to worry about oxygen. So if you're doing the Moda, then you don't have to worry about oxygen. And make sure you're prepared. Bring the right amount of creatures, not too many creatures. Make sure your creatures are strong enough, and make sure you don't die. And that's all I've really got for today's video. So I hope you've enjoyed. And now you've got some boss fighting expertise, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. So thank you to my wonderful patrons, Katerina Puchkova, Karina Thorne, Dominic Mesijewski, and Ethan Tapia, who have all supported me through Patreon or through YouTube memberships. If you want to join this list, then go join Patreon or YouTube members. But thanks to all of these guys.